Welcome everyone. We'll get started. Thanks very much for joining us today. My name is Greig Ward. I'm the Learning and Development Manager and the Chief Content Creator here at the Marketing Sales Group. And what we're going to do in this series of webinars is looking at various elements of leadership, management, sales, and customer service experience, what we've been focusing on for probably the last 3 years, to be fair. And in today's session, what we're going to look at is how do we work towards creating the highest performing team we can, or how do we stay and manage winning teams and get them to a stage where they are performing above their peers or their colleagues or the competition there. So what I'm going to work through with you today, if you'll indulge me here, is take you through a series of a slide deck I've got set aside for us. And what I want to do is, if you have any questions throughout, by all means, utilise the chat or the Q&A function there. Because it's a webinar, you don't have camera access or microphone access, which sort of frees you up to have your lunch and learn, hopefully, from wherever you are at the moment. The theme for us for May is largely around high-performing teams and teamwork and what makes great teams and sets them apart from others that are either in the same field or not even close to them sometimes. So what is it that actually makes these high-performing teams? The content I'm going to be sharing with you today, a lot of it is collaborated from one of our programs called the Evolving Leadership Program, which has now been running for just on 3.5 years now, probably our most successful program, our most sought-after program. And so I'm grabbing some content from it to give you a bit of a snapshot within it and using other resources as well, not purely from the program, but you get a bit of insight as to when we deliver our programs. And as we deliver our programs, you'll get some ideas as to where the information comes from. So we use historical examples, we use case studies, we use anecdotes, we use current stories, and we use a lot of research that's been around as well. So a lot of resources are available to us. Our agenda for our session today, and we're going to keep it sharp. We're going to keep aim inside the 30 minutes today. And our agenda is looking at how do teams form. So when teams form, how do they form, and what are some of the things we can look at? We'll look at Bruce Tuckman's model for this. That's probably one of the more widely accepted models in team formation and things we need to probably watch out for and what to expect when we've got teams working and trying to work towards a high-performing standard. What are some of the characteristics and elements of high-performing teams so we can identify them? And we can also identify what's lacking at times there as well. We can also look at some amazing teams that are out there. We'll look at some very briefly, some teams, and many teams I'm pretty sure you might not have even thought about, but hopefully you'll agree that they are high-performing teams and outstanding in their respective fields. And then we'll also look at what is research uncovering about these high-performing teams. So we're going to look at these as we go through, but the first one, I suppose, is a bit of a Kickstarter question to get you thinking, and that is, when have you been part of or observed a high-performing team? And I'd like to think about what comes to mind. And when those things come to mind, was it a sporting team? Was it a medical science team, such as the groups that were working effortlessly on the COVID vaccination when we all went through that not so long ago? Is it a business-related team that does extremely well? Is it a collaborative group putting on a large event? So what is it about that makes a high-performing team? And then consider what are the traits, the behaviours, the characteristics of these teams. So in your mind, I'd like you to think of a team that you comes to mind for you, and what is it that makes them high-performing? Because that's probably in many ways what we're trying to emulate. And we can look at them in all realms. We can look at them from as I said, from fields of science. We can look from the military. We can look from the arts. We can look at sports. We can look at technology. We can look at design. We can look at all these fields. And we often find the traits have the commonalities. The fields have the differences, but the traits have the commonalities. So we can use diverse examples here today. So if we look at the beginnings of teamwork, we have to understand, I suppose it's and forgive the slide there, the crudity of it, but humans, in many ways, individually, we're not formidable. We're physically not formidable as individuals. We don't have claws. We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have phenomenal strength. We're not the fastest runner. So in many ways, what made us able to get to, in many ways, a position of authority or position of power. And it's largely because what we've been able to do collectively. So collectively, we've become somewhat dominant, and in many other species, probably rightly so and unfairly for us, would consider us somewhat threatening. But that's due to our teamwork. And our teamwork, as you'll see in a moment, is their ability to collaborate, communicate effectively there, reason, and be able to work as a team and not as an individual or a group of individuals, which is very different this. So when I say how do teams form, this is a model that's been around for many years, and it's the work of Bruce Tuckman. And Bruce Tuckman's called Tuckman's Stages of Team Development. And it's important to understand how teams develop and the stages they may spend, the phases they may spend time within. So as a manager of people, as a leader of people, or as a member of a team yourself, it can help you anticipate what may happen or also identify what is happening in the team. And also, sometimes we look at it, if we were looking in further detail, as to what we need to do to move to the next phase. So many of us might have been involved in, classic example of Tuckman's team would be, if any of you have ever been involved in a sporting team that was representative, where you had individuals come from other teams together to make a representative team, like a super team in some regards. So they come from different parts. We often get this when we get new employees coming to the workplace as well. We also get it when we have conferences, when people come together to collaborate, ideally. But what will happen is we sometimes go through this forming, storming, norming, and performing. And ideally, as managers and leaders of people, what we're looking for is we want to squeeze the most out of people. We're wanting to get them to this perform stage. But as Tuckman says, we won't spend equal time, by the way, in each of these phases. Sometimes we'll spend longer in some phases than others. Sometimes the role of the leader or the manager is more important in each of the phases. So as we form, we start to learn about each other. Some people call it the who's who in the zoo. And so we start to get to know what each person's role is, what they've done historically, etc. And it's not surprising at this point that there may be some storming. And storming is a normal part of team development, by the way, if we look at using Tuckman's model. And this is where some conflict emerges. And the conflict emerges largely because we might have similar roles historically. We might have different preferences, and we might have different opinions. So there will be some storming. We might challenge each other. This is expected, almost anticipated. Okay? And some of you might have your sporting familiarity, and you might see some pre-season training from your sports that you love, whether it be AFL or NRL or basketball or whatever it might be. And sometimes the media loves showing there was a bit of biffo on the training track today. And it's them sorting themselves out. And as sort of alpha male as it can sound sometimes, it's not specific to any gender. So the storming is a conflict working out who's who in the zoo. So if Susie and Betty traditionally played goal attack, and now they've come together in a rep team, well, they've got to sort out who's going to be the best goal attack. And maybe one will go to goal shooter, or one will take on the role of wing attack, or maybe they'll divide their time. That's what has to take place in storming. So we need to work out what's taking place. And this takes place all throughout the animal kingdom, by the way. We're not alone in this. Only when we've worked this out can we start working with each other. Right? We're working with each other, but not very effectively in the storming phase. So we start this norming, we start working with each other, and things are starting to click. We've sorted out some things. Only then can we move into this performing where we work as one. So we're not just working with each other, we're working as a group. So you will see this, and I'm sure you've experienced it at some stage, either in your workplace or in some other organisation where there's been teams involved. So it's important to understand that it'll take place. The manager and leader and coach has different roles in each phase. We're not going to dive into them too deep today, but we just wanted to share this with you. So what makes a high-performing team? Well, a high-performing team in many ways has probably three key elements we want to look at here. And the three key elements are the behaviours, the purpose they have, and the actions. So according to this definition here, we look at it's a group of highly skilled people, which in many ways is questionable because not always all the team are highly skilled. However, the three key elements are they're aligned and committed. Right? So these are the behaviours they bring. These bring this alignment, this willingness to work together, and this level of commitment. Right? So we go through this, what we call accept, adopt, embrace. It's a bit of a continuum people will go through when they're brought in with change. It's a change management principle. We accept what's going to take place. Okay, I accept I'm part of the team. I adopt it. I'm taking on the role of the team, and then I embrace it. So we want people to be aligned and committed to what's going on. And they're aligned and committed to what? Well, the shared values and the vision. Right? That's what we're committed to. We don't know what we're committed to. So there has to be this values and vision that we're going to commit to. So this might be a vision statement and a mission statement, what the company works on. And we need to take those words sort of from the wall to the floor. And that means they're nice on the wall, but we really need to walk the talk. And the third one is that we're working towards a common objective. And this is the actions. We're actually working towards this common objective. So not only is there a shared vision and values, there's a common goal or a common objective. Without these elements, it's hard to develop high-performing teams because you can see what's going to be missing. We're going to miss alignment, a level of commitment. We don't agree on the values. We don't have the same vision, and we don't know what the goal is. Without that, it's very, very hard to get high performance. And if you look at underperforming teams, you'll often see some of these ingredients are missing. Other key characteristics here, 5 key characteristics. We have this level of enthusiasm for high-performing teams. They're positive about the team goals. They won't talk down the team goal. There's very little negative talk usually in high-performing teams. It's not tolerated usually, right? So it's encouraged that we're more positive or enthusiastic about what it is we're doing. The dedication is that they bought into the goal. They bought in. They have some skin in the game, we say. Some companies do this really well. It's a great case study of the Harley-Davidson Motor Group. And they had a very large order. It's probably going back just over 10 years ago. And they had a great breakthrough in Japan, where Japanese motorbikes had sort of ruled forever, obviously. But there was all of a sudden great interest in Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Harley-Davidson, the teams that were working, in order to fulfill some of the goals and some of the markets and some of the sales quotas, they had to work overtime. And they had to work over the weekends. And so they created their own little subgroup that was on this team of fulfilling this order that came through from Japan. They were dedicated because they knew if they could crack that market, it would be a win-win for everybody. Teams are deliberate as well. They're deliberate about what they do. They go with intent. And so when they're deliberate, when we say we're deliberate, it's not incidental that they're putting in the effort. They're actually deliberately making the extra effort. The fourth one is they're collaborative. And there's an old saying, yeah, only the person who isn't rowing can rock the boat, right? So this collaborative piece is extremely important because if we get one person that's out of kilter or not collaborating, it can really throw everybody else. So there's a commonality we have with collaboration. You'll see with other models we'll share today that collaboration pops in regularly, that we've got to collaborate. And if we go back to Tuckman's model, sometimes this lack of collaboration is because we're still storming on something. So we've got to get through that storming bit before we can sometimes agree to disagree, but we do need to collaborate. And up again comes the shared vision and purpose. So here we have some of these high-performing teams. What are the characteristics they share? Now, as well as these characteristics, there was some research done by Molyneux and Peterson. This is only recent, 2021. And within this research, they identified these key elements of high-performing teams that they have. And again, we're going to see some overlap here, but they have this level of alignment. They're working towards a common goal. If something's out of alignment, I think most of us know that there's fractures that come along, or that we're not getting the true drive because there's some buffer in the way. So this alignment where our efforts are really pushing each other along. Accountability, that if we're not performing, it's noticed, and we have accountability measures in place. High-performing teams put accountability measures in place, right? So we own this. We own the space that we're responsible for. The third one, collaboration, we've touched upon. Effective communication here. So the communication that comes through in a high-performing team is, we'll see in a moment from the work from Dan Coyle. And when we look at this, the communication piece, that it's frequent, it's open, it's candid, right? We actually call out what it is. So this communication, it's effective. It's often brief. That comes in with it here. So we start getting really effective in our communication. Level of trust. Trust is a deal breaker. We say you sort of earn trust, sort of like climbing a staircase, but you can lose trust like an elevator. So trust is a slow building process, but the presence of trust in a team is absolutely essential. Yeah, and we'll see that shortly. Level of engagement, that we feel like we're involved. It's no use having someone in the team who doesn't feel like they're part of it. They need to know the part they play. Innovation and creativity is important within teams because It'll link late, as you'll see in a moment with Project Aristotle, it'll link to something we call psychological safety. And you may or may not be familiar with the term, but in psychological safety, what we have is the ability to speak our mind, the ability to be different, have different points of view, without fear of retribution or put downs. So it's comfortable being us and comfortable sharing our ideas, and our ideas are taken on board. They might not always be implemented, but they're taken on board. That allows innovation and creativity. Pixar animation, is a great example of that through research. We know, the Finding Nemo, the movie that a lot of us probably watched, was a great example of collaboration and innovation and creativity. The team were trusted to go away and work on a project by themselves for 6 months and given the authority and approval to tackle a project they believe would be good. And what they brought back to the drawing board became Finding Nemo. The presence of feedback. We know in the absence of feedback, it's like working in a vacuum. So working in a vacuum, you don't know which way is up, down, am I doing a good job or not? So feedback is extremely important for high-performing teams. Their resilience to get back after a setback, and they're results-driven as well. It's nice to have all the other things, but the results do need to be there for these high-performing teams. So here's a classic example. I don't know if anyone's ever seen this in Spain, but at the Spanish, I'll call them the championships. These are people towers. Hopefully it comes through okay on your image there, but these are what we call people towers, and they're teams from all throughout Spain. So you have the Catalan team, the Basque team. They come from all different regions, dressed in their team colours as such, and they've got to build the largest, effective, in the most shortest time structure, people structure, purely held together by people. So it's like the spaghetti exercise some of you might have done with the spaghettis, the marshmallows, and the sticky tape. How large can you get it before it collapses? But if you have a look there, there's a lot of these elements and there's usually the smallest person at the top, often a child of about 8 to 10 years old, well padded up, mouth guard, helmet on. It is awesome. After this, feel free to jump onto YouTube and look at the Spanish people towers that they build. It is an awe. And when there's a collapse, but there's a lot of people below set up for that. But there we have the alignment. If they weren't aligned, you can imagine what would happen. There's a little someone climbing up on the outside there, just to the right, top right, you can see. But if they didn't have the alignment, it just wouldn't work. So you may have a great ladder, but it's got to be leaning against the right wall. So these elements, we can see it in play, and we can see it in teams that are effective in businesses as well. So what if any of these were absent? Here they are again, but think if the alignment was absent. If we're not aligned on the same task, we're going to waste a lot of energy. People will be going off on their own tangents. If we weren't if there was no accountability, we'd just be deny, blame, justify. We call below the line behaviour. If we weren't collaborating, we'd have too much conflict, and that'd keep us in that storming area. If you couldn't effectively communicate, we wouldn't be able to pass on our ideas. So the sharing of ideas. If we didn't trust each other, we'd probably be back in that storming area too. We wouldn't get things done, or we'd be trying to take on too much ourselves because we don't trust our team members, and so on and so forth. So if we sometimes undervalue, and we talk about this in a lot of our programs, if you sometimes undervalue or aren't too sure about the value of a certain element or characteristic in leadership or management, think of what would happen if it wasn't present. Right? Think of what would happen in the absence of it. And this is what we often discuss. What would happen if trust was absent? What would happen if we weren't resilient? We'd give up. Right? So there's a stat in Michael Gerber's book, which is really interesting. It's called The E-Myth, the book. And he quotes that 85% of small businesses tend to fail within the first 5 years. And it's well-researched fact, well-documented now. The interesting part is that of the companies that fail and attempt a second time to build their company or build their brand or reputation again, 80% of those are successful. Yet only 20% have a second attempt. So there's resilience, right? Perseverance, maybe deep pockets comes into it too. So here's some teams I'd like you to give some thought to. And they all have something in common because they're all high-performing teams. The Apollo 11 mission, New Zealand All Blacks, the Spartans, the Greek warriors and their family units, the Thai cave rescuers, very recent example for us. And from the animal kingdom, Cape Barren geese. I could use orcas as well, but it's a bit more gory. So in the Apollo 11 case, we had a team, and a lot of people don't know this, and I'll share the source for a lot of these for you at the end too. I'll share the sources. that a lot of our content comes from. I've grabbed two key sources for us today to share. But in the Apollo 11 mission, one of the greatest challenges was that for Neil Armstrong to do his walk on the moon, he had to step out of a sealed space shuttle onto the moon. Therefore, his space suit had to be a sealed unit because he wouldn't survive exposed on the moon. So what they couldn't figure out was vulcanization of seams, or how they could get a spacesuit in the late 1960s to seal and be totally airtight. And it came down to a team of African-American seamstresses. And there's a podcast on this, and I'll share the source in a moment. African-American seamstresses, so stitchers and sewers, who were great at their craft, who were given the latitude and freedom to solve this problem. And they did. They solved the problem so that all the stitching in Neil Armstrong's and successive suits were of their design, so they became totally airtight. And they worked around the clock as a team, cooking meals together, collectively enjoying what they were doing, but they could see the large goal. The New Zealand All Blacks here in Australia, we know very well because they've beaten us so many times. Probably one of the longest successive victory records they have. They had 43 victories in a row, at an international level, and a 76% winning record, which is almost unparalleled, which is why they've won so many awards worldwide. The Spartans, the Greek soldiers, probably they were amazing because of their formations. That they could group together. I'm not sure if you've ever seen the great movie 300, but that their ability to work collaboratively, and for such a small amount of soldiers, they could overcome a formidable enemy. They practiced intensely, and they had a beautiful motto. If you're going to get some tattoos today, try this one. We sweat in training so that we bleed less in battle. And that's a reminder for us sometimes to practice hard, practice hard. The harder we practice, the less it's going to hurt when we're out there in the real world. In business and in teams sometimes, good team businesses practice what they're going to do. They practice their presentation, they practice their pitch, they might practice and rehearse what they're going to be putting together. I think Shark Tank comes to mind. Those who do really well in Shark Tank really usually have a good rehearsed presentation. The Thai cave rescuers, this was a disparate group of people that came from around the world. And we're fortunate from Australia to have an amazing gentleman that joined them as well, and has since been featured in a film and a book about it as well. But we've got a group of people that came from around the world with different expertise trying to solve the same problem and managed to do so. And lastly, Cape Barren geese. You're probably wondering why these come in. Say, Greg, what are you thinking here? Cape Barren geese are renowned for working as a team, collectively as a team. Matter of fact, Cape Barren geese fly in a V formation. And the V formation decreases wind resistance by up to 70% if you're right at the back. Cyclists use this now in a peloton. So they also honk. They honk encouragement. The bird at the front doesn't honk, by the way. All the other birds are honking to encourage the bird at the front. Come on, Harvey, you're doing a great job. Whatever it might be. So they're honking to encourage the lead bird. That way the lead bird doesn't have to look around. Are you still with me? That'd break the streamline. When the lead bird gets tired, they change the formation and a new lead bird takes over. All right. How good's that? Like, watch your leaders. Leadership is a tough gig sometimes. So tapping the leader on the shoulder saying, let us take it. You take a break, we'll take over here. And another beautiful thing about Cape Barren geese, if one of them gets injured, or in North America often shot, at least two other birds will go down with it till it recovers or it dies, after which they will then create their own formation to catch up with the rest of the flock. So there's a lot to learn about Cape Barren geese there. So there's my random example for that one. A more recent one and a business case study for you here today is what we call Project Aristotle. And this was a study that was done by Google. Google was trying to assess, and I've got the bullet points for you there, but Google was trying to attempt to find out what makes great teams great. How come some teams perform and some teams underperform and some overperform? And that no one had really studied it. So there was a 3-year study that was involved, and there's over 20,000 individuals within Google's businesses and associated businesses along the way. Over 180 teams were assessed to see how effective they were. And why were some stumbling and why did some soar? This was the question. And the skills and the background made no difference, they found. It wasn't the skills that made the difference, and it wasn't the background. It was how people felt and how they were treated within those teams. And they came up with 5 key dynamics, which I'll share with you now, for high-performing teams. It's probably one of the greatest studies done now in high-performing teams. So the effective Google teams found they have 5 key dynamics. And if you look at the bottom, it's the most important, and it comes up to the least important of the 5 top ones, by the way, of the 5 top. There were others that contributed. Number 1, to be fair, they did not see coming. Matter of fact, it's only a recent term. We haven't been using it for very long, the term psychological safety. But psychological safety was the number 1 factor in effective teams. And that is, you can see there, team members feel safe to take risks and be vulnerable in front of others. They can speak their mind, they can be who they are in their own skin. And we're getting better and better in this around the world in workplaces, especially in the space of diversity, equity, inclusiveness, that people feel safe, and it's a good place to be. And these become destination workplaces. That's okay to be you. You know, we get diversity in the workplace too. People can speak their mind. There can be what we call radical candor. You know, people can call things out because it's okay to do that. And as you move up, they become less important, but they're still important because these were the 5 top. So dependability, team members get things done. You know, you can be relied on. There's clarity. This is an important one for teams. There needs to be clarity of the goal, and they need to know what's going on around them. To not have clarity, the opposite of clarity might be ambiguity. So we need to have this clarity. Meaning, and this is an important one here. So we see work is personally important to them, but the impact is another one is, does their work make a difference? So not just they enjoy it, it's meaningful work for them, the second top, but the pinnacle there, if you feel familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, you might see a link here. Excuse me. So team members feel their work matters and change. So let's look at Dan Coyle. Dan Coyle, I'll share the book in a moment. His book called The Culture Code. Dan Coyle made an attempt to figure out why some teams are so good at what they do. And some of the teams that Dan Coyle looked at, and to give you, again, the breadth, because I know we've got different people from different industries, professions, and backgrounds here today. And they're going to look at this. All our webinars are recorded and are placed on our website for those who couldn't view it or want to view it at a later date as well. Navy Team SEAL 6. So it was one of the ones he researched. Why were they one of the best military units going around? Secondly, the San Antonio Spurs, right? Popovich's team that has had an amazing winning record. Danny Myers, restaurants all throughout the US. He's a guru in the restaurant space. Bell Laboratories in the technology space, and Google as well. So they were 5 of the teams that Dan Coyle looked at. There were many others he looked at, but they were 5 he highlighted. And if you have a look at the little things, he found these little things that some people call 1%, he goes, made a big difference. So teams that are really, really high performing, close physical proximity, they're comfortable with that. High levels of eye contact, physical touch, handshakes, pats. Think of sports teams, many short energetic exchanges. G'day, Bill. You know, how's the netball on the weekend, Susie? Yeah, just short exchanges. High levels of mixing, few interruptions, lots of questions. And you can see all these ones here that go, these are little things, he goes, people just haven't been paying attention to. There's some of the big ones that Google identified there, but what are some little things we want to try and encourage and do? Another one was this common understanding that exists between teams. High-performing teams have a heightened level of common understanding. And a common understanding means they know that individuals have different expertise and they're aware of what their expertise is. Therefore, it can be called on. They can't all have the same expertise. They have assigned tasks. They know their roles and responsibilities. They know whose job it is to do that. Is there overlap? For sure, there'd have to be. And thirdly, they know how tasks fit into the organizational goals. They see the big picture, right? And seeing this big picture is extremely important for them. If you're managing a high-performing team, and we're wary of time, everyone, so I'm going to punch through the last couple of slides, but I do want to touch on these because a lot of us are managing high-performing teams, or our goal is to have high-performing teams, or we're part of a high-performing team and we can't take it for granted. So how do you manage it, and how can you make sure you have this longevity of it and you feed the beast that needs to be the high-performing team? Creating trust and safety, as we've already mentioned. Use one-to-one meetings. Yeah, they're undervalued and they shouldn't be once a year. All right, so one-to-one meetings, get to know more about your people. Get to know more about your people. Spot interpersonal clashes. This storming phase we talked about earlier, spot them. Don't try and stop it, right? Because sometimes it needs to play out. Think of the brother and sister at the dinner table. So sometimes it needs to play out, but manage and resolve differences where you can. Keep meetings efficient and effective. Get work done. Work's the priority, right? Try not to get caught up in administrivia. Watch out for what I call jargon monoxide, which is just carrying on about saying things that other people don't understand. Provide feedback and coaching. Build the competencies of the team. Don't rest on our laurels that the team's already high performing. Keep sharpening the saw, as Covey says. And use before and after action reviews. And we call this continual improvement. How can we get better? What did we do well? What didn't we do well? What we do the same? What can we do differently next time? What will I add? What will I delete? The two references for today, there are other references, but these are two key ones. I often get asked, where does this come from? What's something I could read? What's something I could listen to? On the left-hand side there, you have that great book where Dan Coyle looked at what are the highly successful groups? What's their secret? And we've been through quite a few of these today, so we've sort of short-storied it for you. But Dan Coyle, he also did a great one called The Talent Code on little hotspots of talent, which was the precursor to this book. And on the right is a podcast called TMSG. Many of you might know Atlassian, the business founded by Cannon Brooks and Scotty Farquhar in Sydney. But they have this podcast series called TMSG, which is it's looking at the chemistry of teams. And they look like Shackleton. They look at Fukushima, a nuclear disaster, Concorde, the collaboration between France and the UK in that, the IPL cricket, Iceland COVID's approach, Thai cave rescue. There's a little short podcast, great ones for walking the dog and learning something as you go. So there's our topic on how we develop a winning team and what are some of the research behind it. Apologies, we couldn't get interaction today, but webinars don't allow for that and it needs more time for it. But if you're interested in following up on any of these, we have our next series, our next topic in June will be effective time management, task and time management. We'll look at some tools in there and some traps. And in July, will be the power of storytelling, the use of story within your business and within teams and individually as well. So thanks very much. Feel free to get in contact with us at the Marketing Sales Group or directly with me, Greg at the Marketing Sales Group, and reaching out. And if you're interested in following up with any of the content or if any of the programs, that's from the Evolving Leadership Program, if that sort of piques your interest, just feel free to reach out or you can find us on LinkedIn as well there. Thanks very much for your time, everyone, and appreciate your involvement and investment of time throughout today. Enjoy the rest of the day and may it be good.